Thank you so much, Glenn, for this introduction on conscious capitalism. My name is Soledad Matteozzi. I'm a board member here at the Connecticut Conscious Capitalism chapter. My background is in law. I work as a corporate lawyer, M&A lawyer for many years, for more than 20 years in New York. Before transitioning to the environmental social governance space, I founded my own company, and we help companies and service providers do business more consciously and more responsibly. And conscious capitalism was so aligned to what I do, and that was one of the reasons that I joined. And when I joined, and due to my background in law, one of the first questions or discussions we had with Glenn was, do you think law firms can be conscious businesses? Do you think lawyers can be conscious capitalists or not? And that was a question that was playing in our head. And we had this idea of bringing more law firms into our network, into our group, and start having the discussion of what does it mean for law firms? What does it mean for the law profession? We usually identify conscious businesses, as Glenn mentioned, with companies that have a higher purpose, that they're thinking more than just profits, and that they're thinking about how to create value for all of their stakeholders, for their employees, for the environment. They're doing great things. Companies like Patagonia or other companies that Glenn just mentioned in his presentation. But when we think about law firms, it's difficult sometimes for some people to think about law firms as conscious organizations. I believe there are many law firms, and there are many law firms that are moving towards this way of doing business. And we're here to talk about that, about their journeys, their challenges, and what can we learn from each other. The reality is that more and more companies are moving, incorporating sustainability, moving to a more responsible way of doing business. And the buyers of legal services are these law firms, and they're demanding the law firms to understand and also to commit to more sustainable practices. When we were thinking about having this conversation within our network, we started researching, and we came across this organization that Gayatri is the executive director from, that is the Law Firm Sustainability Network. We were really happy to learn what amazing things these law firms are doing and how they're really having this conversation. I would love for Gayatri to explain a little bit about what do they do. I know there's something, that organization that I was not so familiar with, and it's a great resource for many law firms that are here in attendance.
Well, thank you, Soledad. So we're very excited to be able to partner with you today to talk about all of these wonderful things. So for those of you who don't know what the Law Firm Sustainability Network is, we are a nonprofit organization of law firms and legal departments, and we are committed to helping to promote the benefits of environmental sustainability within the firms and throughout the industry. And so we believe if we can work together, we can really ensure that firms have the essential tools and the resources so that they can have an ever greater impact on preserving the environment. And so one of the ways that we do this is we have key performance indicators. And we have a signature program called ALICE, which is the American Legal Industry Sustainability Standard. And it is a wonderful resource for law firms to be able to measure their environmental sustainability program and to always commit to that improvement.
So much, Gayatri. And I know that we have here Alison and Pam. They're both members of your network. So it would be great if you can let us know a little bit about them and how did they join, when did they join, what they're doing within your organization.
Oh, so, well, let's, first I'll start with Alison. So Alison's firm, Alison Torbitt, her firm, Nixon Peabody, has been a part of the Law Firm Sustainability Network from the very beginning. And so this is almost a little more than 10 years. Actually, this year will be LFSN's 10-year anniversary in November. So very exciting. Alison, she is a partner in the Energy and Environmental Practice Group, and she focuses on environmental transaction due diligence, compliance, and renewable energy. And she is also the co-leader of the firm's Legally Green initiative and the co-leader of the food, beverage, and agribusiness team. So she is very much thinking strategically about sustainability and the risks for clients when we talk about climate change and infrastructure and the need for innovation. So Alison will soon be joining the LFSN board in a larger capacity. So we are very, very excited. And then Pam, I had the pleasure of meeting Pam back in, I want to say it was either late 2017 or late 2018. I believe you were working on your thesis at the time, Pam. And we actually partnered together, LFSN and Pam, to put together a sustainability landscape survey for the legal industry. And Pam, she is actually the founder and CEO of Amity Advisory, and she works with firm leaders to address the just growing expectations of all stakeholders. So clients, prospects, we're talking about employee recruits and communities. Everything with a firm's ESG, social impact, sustainability programs. And what's really wonderful is she also serves as the VP for at Milliman as a social impact and sustainability officer, which is a global actuarial consulting company. So she brings so much to the table, just so much knowledge and experience for everyone in the group. So thank you, Pam and Alison, for speaking with our group today.
Yes. I'm very excited about this panel. As you mentioned, we have the client perspective, a law firm that has been doing this for a while, and also an advisor of group of law firms. So we have a lot of things to talk about in terms of what are their journeys within sustainability and ESG. There is one, when I first reached out to the Law Firm Sustainability Network, I learned that recently you conducted a survey within members, law firm members. I think there was more than 50 law firms that were interviewed or that answered this survey. And they were asking that if their clients are demanding them, their law firms, to report on ESG and sustainability in their request for proposals. And I was shocked, gladly, I think, to learn that 96% of law firms responded that yes, that their clients are really asking for this in their request for proposals. So I think I would like to start the conversation with our panelists, a little bit reflecting about that, about this survey. Would like to ask Alison if you see this within your organization, if you think that this has been growing, if you see more and more clients asking your firm to provide disclosure of what you're doing in terms of sustainability and ESG.
Yes, I would say almost every RFP we get these days has some question in there that deals with sustainability or ESG of some sort, both whether we're looking internally or whether they're actually asking for external help for us to be partners with them on their sustainability reuse journey. So it's happening all the time, more frequently than not. I'll say the next step really is when do they start vetting those answers? Like I think right now we give them nice answers and they'll be in a conversation, but they don't always ask the questions back. That I think that'll be the next step. We did discuss, just kind of a side note here, we did have one deal this year fall through because of the client's ESG. So our client was acquiring another client. And when we dug in during our due diligence, that ESG was not up to what they said it was. So while it sounded really good, when you dug right in, it was not quite there, which actually made the deal fall through. So we're seeing that now on the business side, on your conscious capitalism side, and I think the law firm will be next.
Interesting. And do you think that after the last 2 years, with the pandemic, do you think this kind of accelerated this somehow or not?
It definitely makes it more obvious, I think, especially with the pandemic as well as climate change becoming more and more. I think if anything, it might be climate change that's accelerating it, but the questions are definitely coming more frequently.
Right. Pamela, I would love to hear about the client perspective, and also with your role as helping law firms answer these requests for proposals. Have you seen this growing as well and more present now than before?
Yes, I will absolutely echo what Alison was saying, is that I think almost every RFP coming into law firms or other service providers now from clients or prospective clients has these questions in it. I would say 5 years ago, these questions focused on diversity and inclusion efforts and do you have a robust program? But now the questions are much broader, focused around ESG. And I'm also seeing questions from clients and prospects, not just about the firm's ESG program, but also what are you doing with your suppliers and vendors to ascertain their performance on ESG. So it's a second tier exploration that clients are even now asking about and expecting to see progress. And I do know of one example where a client actually lost, a law firm client actually lost an existing valued client of the firm because their answers, the firm's answers on the ESG portion of the questionnaire were insufficient to meet our expectations. So I only know of one example, but there may be more out there.
Interesting. It's not only, yes, this is an opportunity that you need to do this, but also a high risk of losing business because you're not thinking about it. So that's very interesting. So you mentioned a little bit about the different factors that they're asking. So if because there are many law firms here that might be interested in knowing, is there certain factors that they're always focused on with regards to specifically to law firms and service providers? Is something that, I don't know, human rights, diversity and inclusion, if we can name 3 or 4 or 5 that are very relevant that should be there, do you think we can do that, or is more like an overall type of thing?
I think it's overall, and I think that's what is surprising law firms the most, is that clients consider law firms a vendor, just like all their other vendors, and therefore they are part of that client's scope 3, right? Scope 3 purchased goods and services. And so what I'm seeing, Soledad, is not that there are specific questions just for law firms, but that law firms are part of the vendor pool and are expected to be making improvements on all things ESG, just like every other vendor. And I think that's what surprises law firms the most, because I think law firms historically have enjoyed this position of not being considered a vendor, but rather a trusted advisor. And, oh, those questions don't apply to us. And I'm here to tell you those questions apply to you and your clients want answers. And to just give you an extreme example, I saw a question coming from a client to a law firm that had multiple offices around the world. And the question was, can you please provide your greenhouse gas emissions per location? And what percentage of those greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to the work you do for us? Oh. And the client didn't even know, the law firm client didn't even know what GHGs were, let alone what they were per location and what percentage was applicable to that client. So law firms are scrambling, I think, to try to get systems of metrics in place so that they can be responsive to clients.
So it's interesting, but I think it's fair to say that as a buyer of legal services, maybe when you're selecting your law firm, ESG and sustainability is still not the #1 criteria, but if you don't have that, you can get crossed off the list and you can lose business. So
yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it will ever be the reason a law firm gets hired, because expertise and skill and deep expert knowledge is really what gets law firms hired. But it certainly could exclude you from the list of firms being considered if you don't meet ESG expectations.
Very interesting. So focusing on that, there's many different ways of many approaches for law firms that want either to get started or get their programs more robust and include all these demands that clients are asking for. So I think I will start with Alison, if you can tell us a little bit of your journey in Nixon Peabody. How did this started? It was something that maybe came from leadership. It was something that you felt that the clients were demanding it. How did you get started? And if it's evolving, how is it evolving?
So we started back in 2007, which we consider ourselves definitely one of the first ones in this space. And it was really an environmental partner at that time, Carolyn Kaplan. And she saw sustainability. We were just starting up LEED, so Leadership, Energy, Environmental Design. The degree certification was coming up. And she's like, I want to do this more full time. So she asked if she could like set aside her practice and do sustainability for Nixon Peabody. So at that time, we appointed, the management was on board. We appointed her Chief Sustainability Officer. About the same time, it's starting to happen in other Fortune 100 companies as well. And so she started up. We LEED certified. The San Francisco office was being renovated. So we actually were the first LEED certified law firm in the country with our San Francisco office, which is now a whole office ago. We're now in a different office. It's again LEED certified. But so that was and that office was back in 2007 as well. And then we've continued to go from then. So we went from a full-time employee who was a former lawyer to doing this to now working on it in different levels. So we now have pro bono, we have the diversity, equity, inclusion directors. We have myself, who's leading Legally Green, who's also an environmental partner with us. And we all kind of come together to bring different parts of it, both from the non-billable side, as well as the billable side. So we're trying to do it from different aspects, both internal and external, billable and non-billable. And I'd say one of the biggest things we did, which was really exciting, was in 2015. Some of our partners had an idea for what's called New Partners Solar, so the Platinum NP. And we created what was a 501c3 nonprofit. We took together the community solar that was happening across the country. We were trying to work on them for our clients and thought we could do this in DC. We have all these affordable housing clients who need cheaper energy. We have this beautiful building in DC we just had finished. It was going to be LEED Platinum. And we were able to negotiate the lease to add the roof onto our lease. And then we went and put solar panels on that roof, connected to the system, and then sold the net energy metering credits from that solar to the affordable housing clients we were servicing through the affordable housing group. So those people, those families got between $20 and $30 less per month on their energy bills. And we got, of course, tax credits. So it was a win-win on all situations. And now we have this beautiful system on the roof. You can go tour. It is actually a fully vertical system, which is pretty unique there for the DC area.
That's amazing. That's a great journey, and I like how it was evolving, and it continued to evolve. And I think crucial how to integrate it within all the, how is it embedded in all the different parts of the law firm, which I think is crucial as well. And so would love to hear your perspective, Pamela, about what if somebody's starting with this and how there's so many frameworks, what would you think, what your recommendation will be on how to get started and how to get the buy-in if you're maybe one or two partners that want to bring this to the law firms and others are not quite convinced about this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I often get the question and confusion about, well, which framework should we use? We don't know where to get started because we're struggling with which framework we should use. And my answer to that is twofold. Number one, deciding on a framework is not the hard part. Building your program is the hard part. And once your program is built and you have metrics in place, you can answer 1,000 frameworks, right? The framework questionnaires and compliance is not the hard part. Building the program is the hard part. So that's number one. Number two, with respect to frameworks, look at what your clients are using. And again, once you have your program and metrics in place, then I would respond to the frameworks that are meaningful and important to your clients. That might be GRI, it might be SASB, it might be Value Reporting Network, all of these, acronyms that are merging and combining and so forth. Check what your clients care about, because again, once you have your program in place, you can respond to all of them if you want, because you've got the answers. The one that I see is growing in acceptance and adoption in the legal industry is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I think the reason those are so popular with the legal profession, and frankly, I'm a proponent of them for this reason, is because there's something in that group of 17 goals for everybody. No matter what client base you represent, no matter which industries you work in, even if you have a full spectrum law firm with lots of different practice areas and industry groups, there are meaningful and material UN SDGs for you to focus on and align with. So I like it for that reason, and then also for the reason that it is quickly becoming the common language around sustainability development. Everyone knows what the UN SDGs are. You can say we're working on SDG number 4, and people know that's quality education. It's really just becoming the common language around sustainability. So I see a growing adoption in the legal industry of the UN SDGs.
Yes, I agree. And with our clients, we work a lot in trying to first understanding what it means. And as you mentioned, it is a common language, something that everybody or most people understand. And it's a way of working all of us together, collaborating towards reaching those goals and trying to really reflect and understand how your business is collaborating. How can your business collaborate with these goals? Because it's true, could be overwhelming the amount of frameworks and benchmarking. And I really like the idea of really looking into maybe what your clients are using, and also what maybe what other law firms that are maybe competitors are using as well to measure this. And because it's if we think about the ESG, now changing from sustainability and this idea and this mindset that is really relevant. So how do we measure progress really? Once we have and we determine that this is what we want to do, how do we measure it? And that is the challenge somehow, sometimes for many law firms. Alison, is there specific frameworks that you're using and Nixon Peabody that work? Maybe you started with something and changed something that is working better than others. I know there's the environment, social, and governance. Do you use one single framework, or what worked for you?
We definitely do multiple. So for the legally green environmental side, we use Voice for Sustainable Economy, which is a Stanford started program that keeps us and makes us report externally to the Stanford law students every year on how many hours and like the financial benefit we've been giving to sustainable startups and nonprofits. So they're climate change focused. Our commitment at Nixon Peabody is 2 million every 2 years. They are biannual goals. And we've been doing between 3 and 4 million. We got 3.7, 3.9 for the first 3 years of that program, was in this 4th year. Similarly, on the pro bono side, we have commitments that we report out externally, which are both already how many average hours per lawyer. Our goal is 60, but our minimum is 45. We definitely always been over the minimum. In addition, it's our percentage of billable time to pro bono, and the percentage of attorneys participating in pro bono. That's always a big one. There's always certain people who are very gung-ho and do it, and then seeing those people that are not quite so as excited to be involved as well. And I can tell you this last year, we got 84% participation. So we are very excited about that we are over that 3/4 mark. So still ways to go, but that is, we kind of do all of those. We also do EcoAnalyze. So that puts us to, EcoVadis, sorry. And that sticks us, so EcoVadis we report out to, we've done this the last 2 years. And right now we're talking about, we want to bring in an actual external auditor to come in and help us with our carbon emissions, to do actually third-party verification of those. Right now, as I'm sure most law firms on this call know, it's very difficult because we lease space. So we're not individually metered overall, especially in the US. So it's very hard to know exactly what our emissions are. And when we get questions, as Pam mentioned in the RFPs about like, it's easy to do travel emissions, but when you start to asking about the carbon emissions of our paper content, It's a bit more difficult. We can tell you we use all recycled paper, and we recycle it after we use it. But it gets more difficult to see like what's the carbon emissions of that paper. It's carbon emissions of the ink we're using in our printers, and how often we replace the ink in those printers. And I can tell you now we go to the next step of working from home, as I currently am, and almost all of us are, and maybe for hybrids in the future. What about our home printers? Are we capturing that and the commute back and forth? It all just gets so much more difficult, which is where we start going, we do need, as a lawyer who's a little bit scared of risk, and wants to have actual, black and white and not this gray estimates. Who do we hire to do that verification process? Yeah. So we're definitely right now in the middle of that interview process, and different third-party verification platform.
And I'm thinking it's so different. Depending on the size of the organization, and I know that big law firms or global law firms that have offices, maybe they use, I don't know, for travel, a travel agency that maybe helps them with the carbon emissions. But I think smaller law firms, or the sales or the procurement department is maybe each lawyer buys their own thing, and so it's more difficult to track and to really put together this data and to really try to figure out what framework works better for depending on the size of your law firm and your capabilities, right? I don't know. Yes?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think it changes too with time. So what worked for you 2 years ago may not be working anymore, especially with the pandemic. So I think these things continue to change, and we have to be somewhat, be able to move with that.
So this is a perfect segue for questions. So Karen asks, for sustainability related initiatives within an organization, are you starting to see organizations having dedicated centralized resources to manage these programs? Or is it more supplemental resources within diversity, marketing, and procurement, et cetera?
I'll chime in first. I am starting to see law firms actually create positions, either sustainability specialist or director of sustainability, depending on the size of the firm. And here's why I think they're doing that, is because without somebody whose time is dedicated to managing these metrics, you are not going to have the answers you need for RFPs. So it's really the managing of the metrics, rolling out the program, yes, but how are you measuring? To Soledad's point earlier, how are we measuring impact? How are we measuring results? That's why I think firms are starting to make it somebody's responsibility to manage DE&I metrics, to manage sustainability metrics, to manage the governance code of conduct and so forth, so that you can be more responsive to these sorts of client questions, and not just static answers, but I have clients that are asking to meet with their providers quarterly to assess progress on ESG matters. So you have to be able to demonstrate forward progress. And unless that's somebody's job, law firms have a hard time doing that. And to somebody's point earlier about procurement and size of the firm, in some respects, it's almost easier if the firm is smaller, because then you usually have one paper vendor, one coffee vendor, one vendor that's servicing your office. If you're really, really large, then you have a procurement department, but anything in between where you have multiple offices and those sorts of decisions are being made at the local level, it is really hard to get your arms around what your purchased goods and services are and what the sustainability practices of all those vendors are. So it's a big job.
I actually have a question. Can I ask a question real fast with Pam on that?
Yes.
Sorry, Soledad. When you're saying firms hire these people, are they mostly attorneys with their own practices, or are they staff that are coming in that have more sustainability specialists, or a mix of both?
A mix of both, but I think what firms are looking for is somebody to join them who has that climate metrics, not, I wouldn't say PhDs in climate science, but somebody who studied environmental science, somebody who's experienced in the tracking of climate and carbon. That's what they're looking for. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lawyer. But I do believe that law firms are, and rightly so, are pooling their talent of lawyers together in order to help advise their clients on this as well. So to your point earlier, Alison, you talked about this. There's an opportunity to advise clients, and then there's the obligation as a firm to be doing the right thing yourselves. You know, you also have to have a robust ESG program in order to hold yourselves out there as proficient and professional and experienced advisors to your clients. The first thing a client is going to ask is, oh, really? Well, what is your firm doing? Right? So you have to have both sides of the coin in place.
Yes, and I think what you just mentioned, Pamela, I think it's kind of key. It has to be integrated or embedded within the whole organization, I think, in order to work. Because if we think, and this is a conversation that's more like a high level, I think we, at Conscious Capitalism, we think that law firms and businesses in general should have a higher purpose beyond just making profits, just making money. And we should think about how we can generate value to all of our stakeholders, not only for the partners of the law firm, not only for the shareholders, but for everyone around. And when we think about this purpose, about what really the business goal of the mission of the law firm really is, it has to be something that is broader. And we see, what I see in law firms is, because of the conventional law firms work kind of siloed. Every office is kind of independent, self-contained. The same with the sectors, M&A, litigation, labor. And I've heard from law firms, for example, saying, oh, we're doing great in terms of ESG. My aviation department is advising clients, I don't know, in reducing carbon emissions. And maybe we have a pro bono practice, but I don't see the dots that are connected towards the North Star, towards a direction that really is thinking long term. What does this mean for us as a law firm? What role do we have to play in terms of advising our clients? Do you see that challenge as well with law firms and with the work that you do?
I absolutely see that challenge, and I also see the challenge of many lawyers think that ESG is for the environmental lawyers to worry about, or DEI is for the labor and employment lawyers to worry about. Governance falls under corporate, but you know, I practice in intellectual property. What does that have to do with me, right? So I heard somebody say once that right now ESG is a practice group at most law firms. Eventually, it is just going to be the mindset under which every lawyer advises clients, because it permeates everything we do. And to your point, Soledad, about having a North Star and having a mission, to me, professional services providers, law firms and accounting firms have an outsized opportunity to have a tremendous influence, because we're talking not just what they're doing for their own firm, but how they are advising and helping their incredible sphere of influence through their client work. This is like the biggest opportunity of our lifetime, not just from a revenue perspective, but from a perspective to address some of society's most pressing challenges.
I agree, and historically, I think lawyers had a very important role to play in society, in changing behaviors, shaping industries, and this is a great opportunity, I believe, too.
And I think in some respects, the pandemic has given us this huge opportunity to sort of rethink and reimagine, and not just rush back to what we used to think was normal, because the pandemic has given us an opportunity to realize maybe it never should have been normal in the first place. So, and a prime example is business travel. I was among many, many people who would just get on a plane without a second thought, because that was part of my job, and I traveled 3 out of 4 weeks a month and never gave it a second thought. I think the challenge for most businesses now is, if and when we emerge from this pandemic, Are we just going to rush back to, again, the way we used to do things? Or are we going to leverage what we've learned through the pandemic, like webinars like this, where none of us has to get on a plane? And for law firms, their biggest carbon emissions for most law firms by exponential factor is air travel. So it's fine to focus on recycled paper and, you know, composting in your kitchens and so forth, but that's stepping over $1 to pick up a nickel. The big carbon emissions is air travel. So let's not rush back to what we used to consider to be normal practice.
Mm-hmm. Alison, do you feel that, I guess, if it evolved, I think it did with it, but the story that the journey that you told us about the law firm, how you started one way, more billable, no billable, and now that you're changing, trying to define what really is the ESG mindset, or the purpose of the law firm, of the organization. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Like right now, we're definitely working on trying to get every single person, attorney, staff, everybody moving in the same direction, that the social impact matters, and that we should be thinking about every decision, every recommendation we give to our clients. What is that impact, and how can we make it less?
Yes. Gayatri, I don't know if there's any other questions out there.
Yeah, so we have another question, and this is the carbon math more favorable for commuting and working in an office, or is it more carbon friendly to work from home? And is there data to show which is better from a carbon point of view?
I can answer that, and I'll even go next level to why it's difficult. So the carbon math is definitely more favorable for commuting, working at your home office versus going to and from the office. It's a little bit less significant depending on what city you're in and how you were commuting. If you were doing public transit versus your own car, that can change how significant difference that is. But overall, working from home is definitely a less carbon footprint. The next question we get to, which probably resonates more, is I think we don't really measure how often our lawyers go to the office. So while the staff have certain hybrid programs and have days they have to be in the office, I can tell you as a partner, nobody knows when I go in and don't go in, and definitely no one's telling me to go in or not to go in. So it makes it much more difficult for us to actually measure carbon footprint, because we don't really have a way to measure when our attorneys are going in or out of the office, to the point we're now looking at the security guard like swipes as you go in and out, which is just ridiculous from a operational standpoint. So there's a little bit extra on that question.
Thank you, Alison. Any other question from the audience, Gayatri?
No, we have a comment just saying that I would love ideas. Well, if any of you want to share, I would, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, but Rochelle says she would love ideas for internal education at law firms.
Well, I'll put a pitch in for Law Firm Sustainability Network webinars, because Gayatri and her team offer educational webinars and tools and templates and the Alice assessment, all of those things. I think if your law firm is a member, anybody at the firm can attend those webinars, and they're incredibly valuable and educational. So that would be a really good place to start.
So we have another question. Where are the biggest opportunities for law firms to have an impact with respect to their own procurement policies other than energy purchasing?
I have my own Mary McGuire here on the phone I can see as well. So I actually pitched that to Mary if you want to try and answer that, since Mary's our internal operations officer.
Well, thanks, Alison. Appreciate that. That's actually a hard question, because I think Pam really took you down the path that one of your biggest impact items is travel, and I would follow that probably second with commuting. So now you turn to what comes next inside your law firms, and until the last couple of years, I would say we were, I'm going to exaggerate a little, but probably about the biggest paper consumers on the planet. So paper is certainly an area that you can look at, and there's a lot of different ways to slice that. With people learning to work remotely, I think we're doing a much better job working with less paper. So that's important. It's just use less, but also, as Alison said, use recycled paper and then recycle it. And so there's a lot of different issues that go with that. And then, you know, we're also in law firms very big hospitality people. So I think if you can look at kind of your processes in food services and things like that, there's some big impacts to be had there as well.
And on that note, I can tell you for our catering this last year, we started looking to only do catering from like woman-owned or people of color-owned businesses. And that was a really fun exercise to go through and find who are these local businesses that are indeed fit in those categories, and then shift over to being like, okay, these should be our first choice. If we're going to do some sort of lunch, even now they're individual box lunches, who can we go to those businesses first instead of our large national caterers that were much easier, but easier is not definitely better. So. And
to that point, Alison, it's interesting you should say that, because one of the biggest ways law firms can have impact, and I'm not just talking about sustainability, but have impact, is through their purchased goods and services. And Alison's example is a perfect one. If we were to start purchasing our big items like our computer infrastructure or our catering from minority and women-owned businesses, we're having a huge impact on helping those minority and women-owned businesses succeed. So having a big impact from a social perspective positively is just as important as minimizing or mitigating negative impact of our footprint.
I agree. And I think when we talk about purpose at Conscious Capitalism and going back to really setting that mindset and what does it really mean for your law firm, there's so many things we can, so broad and so many aspects that we can really collaborate and work on behaviors and practices towards building a more responsible business. But if you really focus on your purpose, reflect a little bit, okay, what are our skills, our capabilities? What are our associates, our partners really passionate about? What do we care really about? Who are our clients? What do our clients really care about? And what need is out there? Where can we generate the largest impact? And then identify maybe a few areas that you can really grow and really make a big difference. I don't know if this is something that resonates with you as well.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think it resonates with clients as well. So for instance, a client company asked or said to a firm, I know you're not minority owned and probably never will be, right? You're a big partnership that's never going to be minority or women owned, but I'm interested in what you're investing in your purchased goods and services, and what percentage of your spend is with minority and women-owned businesses, because we can count some of that towards our target, even though you're our primary spend. But if secondary spend includes a high percentage of women and minority-owned business, that will work to our favor in this relationship. So it is really important to start measuring those things, because most law firms are not minority or women owned. There are smaller law firms that are, but most aren't.
I can tell you, obviously, we have 650 lawyers. We will, to Pam's point, you'll probably never be woman or minority owned, although I'd love to be. We are now doing all women or all minority teams if we can. So we're thinking about that. Like if we have a corporate matter, we've had some success getting all women corporate teams. So from due diligence all the way up, we can get the full that way. So
and that's fun. And that's fun to do.
Very much.
Mm-hmm. So we have a bunch of questions coming in. So related to this, are there any recommendations for how to find diverse or minority-owned businesses? And what can firms do to help generate more options for categories where diverse minority-owned businesses are not readily available at the caliber law firms need their suppliers to be?
So we definitely, at least for us at Nixon Peabody, we kind of made this an internal exercise where we got special legal assistants together, some associates, made small teams. We started in San Francisco, where we actually had all of us kind of ask all of our friends and family. And we started with that. And we went and basically did Google searches, Yelp searches. You can pick minority, women-owned businesses, and then go the next step and actually verify that they are really what they say they are. And then we started creating a list. So it was definitely not easy, but some people really got into it and it became kind of fun. And then this year, which I probably is thanks to Mary, not that I know for sure, we actually had a gift giving guide too. So a holiday shopping guide, which we brought together all of our, friends and family owned, minority owned, women owned businesses and made a guide for everyone in their local cities to go shop locally and help them with that next step. So it takes a lot of time, but the rewarding can be really fun. So
I was just going to say, I love that idea because it engages everybody, and everybody who is friends with or knows of minority or women-owned businesses is going to want to help them be successful. So that is a wonderful way to have employee engagement on all of this. I really like that. The other thing to do is most local chambers of commerce will have lists of minority and women-owned businesses, and also the certification entities themselves will have lists of who has been certified by their women-owned or minority-owned certification process.
We have a couple other practical questions here that I think are really good. So one of the folks has a question, wondering if you can speak to the impact of a firm's ESG on recruiting. There seems to be a growing ranks of eco warriors amongst law schools that examine the client base of a firm. I think we all know what we're talking about here. How do firms, especially large multinational firms, manage this challenging aspect of external communication?
Who wants to take that one?
Yeah. I don't think you guys are succeeding at that at the moment. It's really hard not to be defensive and angry when you read certain reports and you think about how many hours and thousands of dollars we've spent and hundreds of hours, including my own personal 100+ hours a year, to read certain reports and get certain grades. So it's very difficult. And I think that's definitely the biggest challenge, is figuring out how do we better advertise what we're doing and getting ourselves as an entire industry to that next level of advertising the good we are, the social and positive impact we are making.
I agree absolutely with all of that. And I also will remind law firms frequently that it doesn't work to talk about all the good you're doing at your own firm's initiatives here, but then represent fossil fuel companies fighting climate regulation over here. So it does matter, the work you're doing for clients. I think the challenge with some of these report cards that law students have been putting out is, at least as far as I can tell, they are assessing the dollar volume received from fossil fuel companies, not necessarily the type of work being done. So for instance, if a law firm is representing fossil fuel companies and is helping them with the transition, that gets graded the same way as whether a law firm is representing fossil fuel companies in fighting carbon regulations. So I have some issue with their methodology. But I do think that law firms have to give careful thought. This goes back to your North Star and your mission and purpose that you were talking about, Soledad. Law firms have to give careful thought to the impact of their client work.
I have another, Alison, do you want to say something?
I went back through our records here recently to see that our renewable energy practice is one of our premier practices we're very proud of. And that actually started back in 2005. Wow. When there wasn't much going on there. And that was actually a group of transactional public finance and environmental partners who said, this renewable energy thing is going to be the next big thing. Let's focus on this. Let's become the smartest there is in the industry on this, because it's brand new and burgeoning. Like I personally worked in the very first residential solar fund. Mm-hmm. And I remember going we were like, oh, what's the precedent? Where are the template forms I should be using? Like they don't exist. Like we got to create, and like how fun that is. And we need to think about that more and more, what it is that what's next, how do we get there? And then start creating that framework for them. So these companies could actually succeed.
Yeah, and I think that is exactly why law firms should be looking at, okay, we've represented fossil fuels for decades. What do we need to help those companies do to make sure we have those clients for the next decades? I mean, even the CEO of BP said, I don't want to be the CEO of a company 5 years from now where nobody's buying the product. So what do we have to do to evolve and transition? And law firms, you can help your clients do that, or you can ride the horse until it's dead. But then what are you going to do from a revenue perspective? So it's in the law firm's best interest, it feels to me, to help their clients with this transition rather than to fight to maintain the historic status quo. But again, that's just my opinion.
That leads actually really well into this question. You've already sort of talked about this a little bit. How have you been able to monetize your revenue growth and cost savings associated with your ESG strategy? And if so, how detailed is it? For example, does it take into account new client capture, employee retention, and so forth?
That's another very good question and a good opportunity for all of us, I think, to do better. We've been able to monetize our pro bono work towards the startups, the sustainability nonprofits. And that's pretty easy to do because we track our hours already. So when we open a new matter that is a non-billable matter, there is a box you can check saying that is social impact, green impact. There's like different categories, DEI impact. And then we can track those hours at the end and figure out what the monetization of that is and how many, if we were to bill this time, what that number is. So we've been able to do that fairly well. But actual revenue growth and cost savings gets to be more difficult. And I think that that's a place that I'm hoping we go in the next year or 2 years, but that's going to continue to make this, the point that Soledad and Pam has here of we are generating revenue and we are getting, this is becoming a necessary component of every law, it should be of every law firm.
And I would add to that, you know, what's the cost of doing nothing, right? So I gave the one example of losing a client. So yes, I think it is important to start establishing methods to measure the revenue growth or the revenue earned, but it also, we have to keep in mind that this is just table stakes. And not having a program is going to cost you recruits, is going to cost you potential new clients, and maybe even cost you the loss of existing clients. Because they have goals that they're trying to meet, and their purchased goods and services have to be along for the ride, or they're going to move on.
So I could add one more thing. I think that there's also the small potatoes where you partner with your clients. If you have an idea that like, hey, they have this waste product that they're currently paying to dispose of. And if you can find some other client or somewhere else, you can match them together. And all of a sudden that client now is saving money on their raw products. This client is now saving money in disposal costs. You are helping the clients, you're doing better for the world. Like it can be such a win-win. And that's like what makes me love my job, when those things actually work out. Like, oh, this worked. And that can be like, these are really small decisions you can make every day to kind of help that out.
And that's one of the reasons I love the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because goal number 17 is partnership for the goals. So if you've got clients that are UN Global Compact members, they're looking for people to partner with on initiatives. And if you can do that and earn revenue and help, and everybody's a win-win, it's just blissful.
I love this. And I think one of the things that, one of the principles or main tenets of conscious capitalism is that how we create this long-term relationship space in win-win, and how can law firms that traditionally we are identified as win-lose or more adversarial, how can we change to this win-win mindset? And partnerships, it's key. And I think we're running out of time, but focusing on partnerships, I really like the saying that, you know, if you go alone, you go fast, but if you go together, you go further, you have bigger impact. And this is what I love about these conversations. Thank you so much to the Law Firm Sustainability Network, to both of you here, to partner with us, to have this discussion, have this safe space where we can all share information, challenges, and make the changes that we want to do.
Thank you, Soledad and Gayatri and Pamela and Alison. Wonderful ideas, and it was such a joy to be in this nurturing conversation for the last hour. And you know, along the lines of what I was saying about every purchase you make, it's every client that you choose too. You can definitely make a vote for the kind of world that you want. And I have great hopes and aspirations for the people in this room today to make some great choices around that. Thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a terrific conversation, and we hope to see you back in this room again.
Thank you. Thank you, Gayatri. Alison.
Bye-bye.